Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming today, and welcome to our October Ambassadors on Call. I'm Kelly Clyburn, and I am so happy that you're all able to join us today. I'm particularly excited about today's presentation, not only because I think the topic is so timely and relevant for all of us, but because I think you're really going to love our presenter, Dr. Amy Acosta, who is truly one of our TCH superstars. So to help you get to know her a little bit better, I'm going to play a game called Two Truths and a Lie. Most of you know how to do this. I'm going to give you three statements, two of which are going to be true and one is not true. And y'all are going to tell me which one you think is not true. So first of all, Dr. Acosta was born in California, but she got to Texas as fast as she could. That's number one. Number two, she attended Second Baptist High School, where she was their high school mascot, which was the eagle. Number three, she got her PhD at the University of Houston in counseling psychology. Okay, so who thinks she's from California? Wow, okay. Who thinks she went to Second Baptist, where she was the mascot? Okay. And who thinks she went to U of H and has a degree in psychology? Wow, y'all are amazing. She is a proud native Houstonian. She's not from California. True. And she has two beautiful children, Sarah, who's 9, and Ethan, who's 2, with whom she spends all of her free time. Okay, I have one more. All right, she loves musicals, and her favorite musical is Les Miserables. Okay. She loves the band The Eagles, and she even went backstage at their 1996 concert at the Astrodome. She loves Fitbit challenges, especially among her colleagues. Okay, musicals, Les Mis. Loves the Eagles, went backstage at the Astrodome. Okay. Loves Fitbit challenges. Okay. I do not know if she likes the Eagles. I do not even know if they played at the Astrodome in 96.
But that part.
That part was made up, so no. But I can tell you that she is a licensed psychologist here at Texas Children's in adolescent medicine. She's worked in both school and hospital settings, and her clinical specialties are eating disorders, body image concerns, anxiety, and depression. Her academic and research interests include eating disorders, bullying, parenting in the digital age, digital wellness, transition and mental health, and cultural body image themes. Currently, Dr. Acosta provides mental health services through Texas Children's Adolescent Inpatient Clinic, as well as Texas Children's Adolescent Clinic, and at Covenant House, Texas. She developed a passion for this topic with bullying and social cruelty and community building when she was working in schools and helping middle schoolers solve social dilemmas. Please help me welcome Dr. Amy Acosta.
Thanks, guys. Sorry.
Okay.
No worries. Is my mic on? Sounds like it is, yeah? Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you. I'm so excited to talk to you about this topic. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right. Admittedly, I'm a little bit nervous, but I do love this topic, so I'm excited to talk to you about it. It's a strange thing to love this topic. I really did come into it when I became a school psychologist, and I officed 3 doors down from the technology director. And at that time, our bullying program at the school was similar to other schools. It was pretty traditional. It was pretty much about the different roles, whether you were a bully, a bystander, or a victim. And it really didn't incorporate a lot of conversation about what was going on online and all of those pieces. So that became a passion, and we together, the technology coordinator, Larry Kahn, and I went in and started talking to middle schoolers, having conversations with, sorry guys, hold on, I'm dropping in and out, so I'm gonna just hold it. That'll be better. I started having conversations with middle schoolers, high schoolers as well, and different students about these issues and sort of doing some peer mentoring and things like that. So my real passion is talking to adolescents. I love talking to adolescents, but I think second to that, I really love talking to parents. So I'm excited today to be giving this talk with you to parents, caregivers, and adults about this topic. I think it's really important. So I want to start with some overarching public health goals for today, so that I think that we're all on the same page for these goals, which is that children develop skills to manage these difficult social dilemmas, because these social dilemmas continue throughout life. As we all know as adults, we continue to have dilemmas about how to be kind or how to respond to something difficult, how to manage our own Facebook newsfeed. Okay, so these are all things that we continue to manage, and so helping children manage these difficult situations is really important. And that families would have tools to support children and systems and are better able to foster those safer environments for children. And we're going to talk about environment today because that is such an important part of this topic. And then again, that children make choices that ensure not only internet safety, but social safety amongst each other in person, with themselves and with others, so that they start to make those choices even preventatively as they think about different interactions, or I should say not just avoiding the negative, but then putting forward that positive digital footprint or positive act of kindness in real life. And that children then think critically about in-person and digital decisions to reduce their risk for peer victimization. Now, that's a lot for a kid to do. That is why children need your help as adults to do these things. So we want to achieve those goals, again, of safety. And safety, I think we're thinking about in various terms. There's sort of the basic safety risks that we'll talk about, but there's also more nuanced safety risks and feeling safe within yourself or with a comment that you made, or that a comment that was shared, and do you feel safe in a relationship, those kinds of things. So from the more subtle to the more obvious, that idea of safety. And then that idea of critical thinking, or being able to problem solve for oneself, is a skill that is developed over time and through the course of development, right? So we've got to think about children are developing and their ability to have these logical thinking skills, or it's going to develop over time, right? And then, of course, learning, and that these experiences are learning experiences, and how can we make an environment where these learning experiences don't hurt children in significant ways, and they can kind of have more resilience. In other words, we can't remove all the bumps or all of the challenges, but we would want to make sure those bumps aren't canyons, and at the same time, how can they bounce back from that? How can they grow from that? How can they change from that? Okay. So what we know about bullying from past research and prevalence. So this was from 1998, this large study, and it looked at a large number of students asking about bullying, and it was from the World Health Organization, and the results really showed that a large number of students were saying they were being bullied at 29.9%. But what we kind of know now, and we're looking, and this is a review article, which what this does is reviews lots of articles that talk about bullying, so that's why I chose this. And the JAMA is the Journal of Adolescent Medicine, and in 2014, it looked at traditional bullying being twice as common as cyberbullying when you looked at all of these studies, and that cyber and traditional bullying were also highly correlated, and that would make sense, right? I think that we would not be surprised to see that. But that there was a wide range for cyberbullying prevalence, okay? So that range was wide. And then the other piece was that there's a high variability in prevalence rates. So I'll ask you guys a question. Why do you think what we now see is a high variability in prevalence? We can't say per se 29.9%. Why do you think there is this big variability in prevalence? Anybody know? Partially. People might not support it. Awareness or reporting. Absolutely. And so whether or not people report it, all of those things, depending on the school climate, we'll talk about that as well. But the other piece was that it was difficult when you looked at the research to see what the criteria was for that term, bullying, okay? So what one child might perceive as an act of harassment, another child may not. Or what one researcher might see as the definition of bullying, another might not. And so that really becomes important because what it means is our words are important, and a child may say, nothing's happening, everything's fine, when in fact it's not. And it's really about kind of, well, I don't think I'm being bullied because I define that in this way, if that makes sense, okay? And so when we think about the practical applications of that, we can see where there is that variability in responses. So what some scholars, and this was the criteria I went ahead and put down because I felt like this was the repeated criteria, which was that there is intentionality, okay, and that there's repetition, and that there's a power imbalance. So when we think about when those three things are prevalent, it doesn't mean that you can't be hurt by a joke that goes wrong. And that's why I kind of titled this social cruelty, right? Because it's a little bit different than thinking about an intentional act. But unintentional acts can be very harmful. But of course, when it is systemic and it repeats and it's intentional and there's a power imbalance. So sometimes maybe it's unintentional and a kid thinks that, oh, well, I don't think I did anything wrong. But then when I ask that kid to reflect, well, does that peer say those same jokes to you? Oh, no, now that I think about it, not really, right? And so if you think about then that child starting to realize that they really have the power in that particular relationship, and it's not joking back and forth, because joking feels like a back and forth. People feel good afterwards, and it's usually a back and forth. So that's an important factor that a child may or may not know. Okay, so that's an example. And then, of course, the repetition over time. And we can talk then about peer victimization, which in the literature is a little bit different. This would be repeated harassment, that imbalance of power that we talked to, and intention to cause harm. That can be either verbal or nonverbal, and it can include exclusion. And so exclusion can be subtle and difficult to manage. So if you think about in a school climate and the task of managing looks that send messages, that's really difficult to do, right? But it can be about excluding someone even non-verbally without having said anything, right? And so then several studies identify a relationship between bully victimization and suicide attempts. So we have to talk about this risk of suicide and the risk of also isolation. So we think about the risk for suicide is highly correlated with the risk for depressive symptoms, and depressive symptoms would include isolation, and peer victimization would isolate, okay? So thinking about that. And that there's a positive relationship, meaning one impacts the other between peer victimization and suicide ideation, okay? So that's just sort of a lot to take in, but to have a real understanding of this topic that I think is widely talked about, but really difficult sometimes to fully feel like you have a grasp around this topic. It can feel like a little bit overwhelming. Global health problems and bullying. So obviously there are impacts, risk factors when a child is being bullied or being harassed, especially over time. And so correlational, meaning it's not, one doesn't necessarily cause the other, but they tend to happen, impact one another. And so depression, anxiety, self-esteem, health problems, and then school absences, school refusal, even not wanting to go to school, decrease, lowering in grades, and that there is this relationship between those students who are involved in cyberbullying others, being cyberbullied, and bullying others. So there's sort of this relationship between if you are then at risk for being bullied, that then you're also at risk for hurting somebody else, okay? And that's important to know. Everybody okay so far? Okay. There's a lot of heady stuff, but we'll get to talking in a minute. So cyberbullying is something that you have heard a lot about, and it, again, similar to traditional bullying, has wide variability in the definitions of cyberbullying, okay? But here, for our purposes, we're going to think of it as harassment that occurs online. And it happens most frequently by peers. That's important. That statistic hasn't changed over time. It doesn't mean that if you have a child, especially a younger child, that you aren't going to be concerned about that outside perpetrator that could be present. You need to be concerned about that, and that's a very real concern. But what happens is that risk is low, or the prevalence of it is smaller than the risk of being harassed by your own peers, okay? When it does happen, the findings show that it is highly dangerous, right? So it's, even if it's rare, it's very concerning, okay? The outside perpetrator. What's not so rare and more common is peers, okay? And so findings show, as far as that risk, that sort of risk both with outside and perpetrators and peers, that students who are having trouble offline are vulnerable online, okay? So think back to the statistic or the finding or the result that I shared where the cyberbullying correlates with in-person bullying. Well, what also correlates is if you're vulnerable offline, you're going to be vulnerable online, and you're going to be vulnerable with your peers in those difficult social situations. And if you can kind of think personally in your own life, at times when we've had struggle, or at times when we're feeling particularly stressed or tired or feeling down, we're going to be more vulnerable to being in very difficult situations or in harmful situations for ourselves. And so similar with our children. And so you may, for example, have a child who one of the vulnerabilities might be impulsivity. So maybe it's a child who has attention deficit disorder and is highly impulsive and makes those decisions pretty quick. Well, that might be a child you manage differently online and your online rules than a child who is, always maybe even overthinking those moves and those thoughts. And that overthinker might be more prone to some stress and anxiety about what's going to happen next, okay? So everybody's different, and if you have more than one child, you know that they all kind of have different styles, and you parent slightly differently for each child, right? Because they have different needs. So, am I doing on time? Talk to you. Of course, speaking of the Fitbit truth, when I tap it, it gives me every stat but the time. So, the one stat I want. Let's talk about cyber victimization a little bit. Uh-oh. Goodness. So, with 7% power, and I don't know how to get that off. Sorry, guys, technicality. And I don't seem to have I can do this, at least. We'll keep going until then I'll just talk to y'all. We'll bring up the lights, that's fine. So this basically was a study that looked at 6th grade through 12th grade, and what I'll just highlight here, because you have the slide in front of you, is that what was really found was this sort of peak in 7th grade, which makes sense, right? So the curvilinear relationship means that risk for bullying goes up and cyberbullying goes up, peaks at 7th grade, and then comes down again. And this makes sense, right? If you're talking to a high school senior, and that's a lot of what we did when I was in a school environment. We would have the older students talk to younger students and create sort of a peer mentoring support. And what was interesting about that from a digital wellness perspective is that I found that the seniors were probably more strict than the adults, right? And it was because these were their little brothers and sisters. They'd been there, they'd seen it all, and they were kind of more concerned, I think, sometimes, and really overprotective, which was kind of sweet. But what the reason I share that is we kind of learn things, right? And so as we learn, oh, I better not post that, or if I post that, I'm going to get all these comments I don't want, or if I kind of vague book and sort of put out there that I'm feeling down, ... and nothing else, then I'm going to get all this sort of ambiguous feedback back, and it might not make me feel better. Right, so then you kind of learn those things, and then through learning that, it goes down. So it made sense to me, this statistic. Again, prevalence continues to be more in person than online. That surprises people, but when you look at this study, it basically does show, though, that when we're talking about telephone or text messaging, and when we think cell or landline, I think it's funny that but this is like a fairly recent study, then those things might also be online as well. So the risk factors, of course, have changed over time, and that more what I would call a 2.0 risk factor, where we were 10 years ago saying just unplug, just walk away from a situation, right? We are finding it's more complicated than that, and we have to think about those complications. Sometimes just telling an adult may feel difficult for a child. They're going to think about, well, how will that play out, right? So when we're thinking about those 3.0 risks, it really is a little bit more nuanced. And of course, children making mistakes is part of that natural development of children, right? I think, though I wasn't at an Eagles concert in 1995, I was at a concert in 1995, and whatever happened there sort of stayed there, right? It's a little bit different now. So whatever conversations you had on your front door stoop or at the roller rink, those are happening more in public and with the potential for permanence now. And so the note that you used to pass in class is now a text and can be saved, okay? So when we think about those nuanced risks, it's a little bit different. And that online risk of sort of seeking that validation, like I shared before. So if you already know your child or a child that you love is feeling vulnerable or going through something, maybe parents are getting divorced, maybe they're kind of going through more of an episode of depression or anxiety that they're struggling with. That might be a good time to talk about, is this a good time to be online, or bedtimes, right? So at 2 a.m. maybe isn't always the best time to be communicating if you're not rested. And are you making those same decisions you would make at 3 p.m., those kinds of things. I ask children to think about the grandmother check. If your grandmother were over your shoulder, would you post that? If not, maybe not. Or how would you treat a peer if your coach were watching? Those kinds of questions that begin to get at that idea that that quote that I don't know who it belongs to, but it's a lovely one, which is, character is what happens when nobody else is watching, right? So really starting to think about that and talk about that. And I really believe, after having given these talks and talked through these topics, they are difficult topics. And it's not that there's any one solution. I wish I had it. If I had it, I would give it. But what we do know some things. And one of the things we do know is that having these ongoing conversations, opening these topics up, being able to talk through them with your children in a way that that is comforting and supportive is really important. And so don't be afraid to talk about these things. Again, one of the risks online that isn't in person is the minimal physical and social cues. And I'll again remind us of that statistic from the beginning. If there's a correlation between online and in-person bullying, what this can also mean is that you've had a day of feeling hurt or harassed, and then you go home and you continue to manage that. The other piece that I think we all were granted was at 3 o'clock, it got to end, right? Whatever it was, and you started a new day. And so the idea that it's sort of ongoing, and that then there are these minimal physical and social cues. So this is where a child might get involved in what felt like a joke maybe was even perceived as a joke. So we've all seen online where there's a 2 or 3 person conversation where clearly everybody in that 3-person conversation knows what's going on, but you've broadcast it to your entire friend network, right? Which is, I can't even imagine for a kid, for a teenager, how large that pool is, but it's pretty large, right? And so then you're not getting those social cues that you would get. Like, I'm looking at you guys for social cues, and as you nod at me and as we are following each other, I kind of know that. But if I'm online, I don't get to get that. And I may know how my friend responds in a one-to-one interaction, but I don't know how this sort of audience, this invisible audience, which may include my aunt or my grandmother or my professor. So that's the other piece that I think youth have to think carefully about, is their networks merge more closely than ours ever did. Okay, so and our networks now merge more than they ever had before, right? And the beauty of that is I'm reconnected with my 5th grade best friend. That's nice, but it also means that anything I put out there, I put out to my colleagues, my friends, the moms of my daughter's friends, all of those people. Okay, so I have to think about that a little bit differently, and imagine trying to think about all of that and being 13, 14 years old. Okay, and doing what a 13-year-old can do best, which is try on different identities and figure it out, right? That's developmentally appropriate. So that's the other piece. But again, anonymity, and we all know how anonymity feels, because anyone who's ever opened up a comment section on a controversial article sees what anonymity does, okay? So right when we feel anonymous, we tend to be more unedited and unkind. So I want to talk a little bit about improvements to this. How do we, because it's not, I retitled this and building connections because we do know some things now. We've been looking at this concept for a while, and we do know some things about how to build a positive environment, things, take-home messages, things that we can work on. So students attending schools, this is a surprising finding from 2013, but that attending schools with anti-bullying programs may be more likely to be a victim of bullying than children without. Okay, one reason may be is that students who are victimizing peers may have learned the language. They've learned what to say when the counselor comes and talks to them. It's you kind of learning the nuance of that. The other piece that I've talked with my colleagues about is what we don't know from this study really is what kind of programs are they looking at, okay? Are they the more sort of traditional programs that sort of target people? And like when I say people, I mean there's a bully, there's a victim, there's a bystander, and not as much a process, because what we do know is that kids fluctuate in their roles. And so then, you know, if we're kind of a kid may feel targeted and cornered, and that's his role, and then it's hard to break out of that role. So what are these programs really showing, and are we really looking at some broader picture pieces? We do know some stuff about the broader picture pieces. Here's another cool finding. So in 2011 out of UC Davis, they were looking at that the very most, like if we thought about, if kids were to say, who's the most popular kid, the most well-liked kid, that was not the child who was tormenting other children, most likely. It was so at the adolescents at the very top of the social hierarchy did not act aggressively towards their peers, and perhaps one of the writers thought is that it may be perceived negatively in that social climate, okay? So as a sign of insecurity or weakness if you were to do that. And that it's possible that at the highest level, they may receive more benefits from embracing more pro-social, kind, pro-positive school climate information feedback, than if they don't. So that's kind of cool, because when I think about this other slide that finds that maybe some of these programs don't work, I think, boy, that sort of peer mentoring at the, you know, when you're now asking your kind of superstars to be a superstar and be kind and invite that kid to sit with you at lunch, that actually could potentially work, right? That's what this would show. School climate. So we do know that. We do know that school climate is related to bullying. And what we know is that it's related to academic achievement, learning, and development. And the APA put out kind of a brief on this, and I'll just read you a couple of things. So students who have schools with positive climates tend to have better school attendance and study habits. They tend to be more motivated and committed academically. They tend to engage in cooperative learning, and they tend to have higher grades, test scores, and subject mastery. Now, students who have more negative school climate may not feel as safe to go to their network. And when I say their network, that doesn't just mean their teachers, their counselors, the school nurse. It also means the parents in that school as a school climate. Okay? And so thinking about that role that you can have, and it's an important role. The role you have when you're at the soccer game on the sidelines, how positive are we talking about ourselves, our children, and all of those pieces? I really feel like that's a very important piece in building that positive school climate, where when your child is in trouble, do you feel the comfort calling that other mom and talking through it and knowing that you both really care about both of your kids? Okay? Do you have that? And how can you start to create that? Now, I promise I didn't even really talk to Sarah Fisher before showing this, but they Positive Works is an organization in Houston, and I have been a consultant for them on a couple of their brochures that they've written, but they really focus on this school climate piece. And I have a video, but yeah, we've got time. Can I show it real quick? It is a little bit long. I might not show you all of it, but let me show you some of it, because what's cool about this is an anti-bullying program that started with 2 moms in our greater Houston area, and they've been written up in the Houston Chronicle and in other places. And so I thought this was kind of a neat organization to highlight because it's kind of homegrown, and I am a Houston native and all that stuff. But also because it really does promote this idea of school climate. And when I'm going to go backwards real quick. That first bullet point, when we see bullying as a process, and by that I don't mean that you're not accountable for your actions as a person, right? You need to be accountable for your own actions as a person. I get that. But when you see it as a process, it's something that can be changed, right? If you're just the kid who everybody thinks is a bully and that's it, then we're talking about an outcome that can't be changed, if that makes sense, right? But what we know about online bullying, for example, is that those roles fluctuate more frequently than in-person bullying. Well, what does that tell us? That tells us that those roles are not solid. And as we become more and more online, and we know that those roles fluctuate, what that means is you can be targeted, and then maybe because you're targeted and you're feeling kind of raw about it, you say something unkind back, and it becomes really kind of like a really unfortunate social interaction. And unfortunately, I do think in the broader mass media, broader sort of celebrity culture, this is sort of echoed through sort of little blog wars and things like that, right? And so when we think about that, this as a process, what's encouraging about that is then we can change it. What's discouraging about that is it means it's a process that happens not just to elementary school kids or high school kids, elementary school kids on playgrounds or high school kids online. This happens even in work environments. This happens everywhere. And so to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem is really, hopefully, if you come away with nothing else, I hope you come away today feeling encouraged to build that positive community, because it's within you. It's within you just to sit with your friends at a coffee and build that positive community. That's what you're building. And so it doesn't take but that decision to do that. And so that's what really Positive Works does. And so I was going to highlight that for you. Let's see if I can find that mouse again. Had it. Well, there it comes. Sometimes it just disappears and sometimes it comes back.
It feels really good to find your voice, to just know that I actually have a voice, and to find that voice and just speak out. It feels very powerful, and that power makes us really positive, just knowing I can stop this, I'm not weak, and that we can make a difference.
Have you ever lost your voice? Have you ever longed for the words to speak up for yourself or for your child?
We know how it feels to lose your voice. We also know how it feels to find it.
Imagine a school where all of the children have learned to speak up, to be upstanders, to find their voice, to speak up for themselves, and to speak up for other people. It's a wonderful thing.
We've learned so much since starting Positive Works in our own neighborhood. We've learned that bullying will remain a pivotal human issue until the majority of adults in our communities buy into the idea that bullies will only do what bystanders allow.
We've learned that in order to raise vibrant, caring, resilient kids in our community, we have to learn to speak up as upstanders, as adults in the lives of our children. We must speak up on these tough issues that keep us up at night, whether it's bullying, hyper-competitiveness, risky teen behaviors, or the challenges that accompany today's advanced technology. Only when we find our voices as adults can we help our children to find theirs.
I first heard about Positive Works from my social worker. She brought in an article from the local newspaper and said, we've got to talk to these folks. We've got to talk to these moms. They've started this program, this idea in our community, and I want to know more about it, and I think it's the right thing for Roberts.
The article was written by two women who live in our community, who are moms, who were having some of the same kinds of difficulties in their schools, and they had started a program for helping schools to deal with their bullying situations and the meanness of the kids to each other, and it was called Positive Works.
What we were so intrigued by was this idea that it was a building of a community language, that our families and our teachers and our students could all come together under this common language and this common idea about tackling bullying, not after it happens, but really before it happens.
Positive Works offers something more than a lot of the other anti-bullying programs do. It pulls in all of the pieces in our community. It pulls in the parents, the students, the teachers, the staff members. Everybody's involved in it, and it focuses on everything in the campus. And so for me, it was a matter of bringing in and continuing the atmosphere of we respect one another and we do what's right for our kids, and you promote that upstanding environment.
You can't raise a child without both parties working together. So I think that it's really wonderful that parents and teachers have a program that helps them collaborate and benefit the students.
So you all said there was a hot spot right by the water fountains in those trees right outside the back door, right? You said there was a hot
More than
spot.
anything, what we need is a student body who is open and inclusive. The Student Coalition has helped us do that because we've brought together children from many different cultures and asked them to really tackle the problem. And so they started with, let's identify the hot spots. Where on campus are these things happening?
Ra?
Okay, so I think the one beside the water fountain is actually getting much better, like it's not that much.
Okay, so would you all agree that this hot spot has improved?
Yes.
So we can erase this hot spot?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the Student Coalitions, we talk about different scenarios and where someone's getting bullied and what we should do about it. And we talk about how, like the different types of bullying and how we solve them and how they're caused.
Okay, and then the new hot spot, do you all agree that the new hot spot is kind of over here, way far out in this area? Yeah.
We made the most gain when we got children involved, when it was the children that were helping us identify the problem and define the problem and create a solution. That's when we made the most change.
Morning meeting came to Coulter because of a survey that we gave to the students and the teachers that Positive Works gave to us. And we decided to give the survey to all the kids to see if they felt safe at school and if they felt connected to their teachers and if they enjoyed being on campus and they felt that the climate was safe for them.
One of the things that came out of that was this lack of connection between the faculty and the students. And so we did some research to find out what could we bring into the school to help enhance that connection. And so morning meeting just kind of fell into place.
Hi, Hannah. I like your outgoing personality. Thank you.
With the morning meeting, everybody in our class has shared something. I think everybody in our class has gotten to know each other better. Kids in school need to be oneself, to be authentic. I wanted there to be a place where everybody has a voice and everybody can be heard, everybody can be validated and supported.
I've learned from morning meeting, it makes me a better all-over student, and I can communicate with others easier and better, and I feel that I have respect.
Let's take a moment and reflect on last week and how we did. As our end of the day positive daily reflection consists of simply talking about the day, what worked, what didn't work, and identifying any problems. It's not just about reflecting on behavior, it's about reflecting on your thoughts, because negative thoughts can frequently lead to negative behavior. It's about reflecting on your motivations. Why are you doing what you're doing? What is it you're wanting to get? And so I think the reflection component that we've started integrating is probably the most valuable tool that I have in opening up the dialogue and working the action cycle with them.
Positive Works has had a very large impact on our community. I think to learn to be upstanders, to learn to respect different cultures, to have a value system that is global and that works anywhere in the world, who would not want their children to be open-minded and resilient and respectful?
So I like that we know how to treat people and that there's actually support, that still matters, and it's not just about getting kids to do well on their report card and do well on a standardized test, and that we can still teach them that, you know, being a good human being and being kind to each other still matters, and it's very important.
We're seeing children that feel really powerful in that bully-victim triangle. They no longer see it as a two-way street. They see it as the triangle. We want them to see it as, and they're feeling powerful to step in and speak up.
Other students, they can learn how to stand up to bullies, and the Student Coalition, we can help people that don't quite know how to, and we can help people that are being bullied, and we can upstand.
I feel like we have now the words and the awareness. We have signs all over the school that show positive playground, positive classroom, positive cafe, even positive bathroom. It just keeps it in our forefront. It keeps us talking about it. You just know that the conversation is there and the awareness is just so much more obvious around the school.
It shows that parents do have a voice in the school and that you can make a difference if you're a parent by saying, hey, here it is. This is what's necessary to change the culture, and we're willing to help you do that.
As you can see, Roberts Elementary and Coulter Elementary have made an important daily commitment to build a new sense of positive, upstanding community. It is so incredibly hopeful to see teachers, along with their students, having fun, connecting, and creating authentic change. We encourage you to visit our website to learn more about these ideas and many other incredible ideas that are helping students to find their voices in our positive community of schools.
We are so excited about the progress we've made since our grassroots beginnings in 2010. But in order to reach more families, schools, and the wider community, we need your help. Join the positive movement. Help us
highlight a couple of other pieces. So when we think about being online, sometimes we worry so much about the risk we forget what the benefits are. So what youth will say, and in a large study by the MacArthur Foundation, youth talked about that they gained skills to manage their public profile and online reputation. They were able to gain that through being online. If they weren't online, they weren't part of that conversation. And those are really important skills for the modern youth going into jobs that don't even exist yet, right? So if we really think about that piece, they do need to know how to manage those skills online and have that critical thinking. Sometimes when I talk to adults and caregivers, I wasn't raised in this technology world, so there's this idea that I wasn't born a digital native, and I'm an immigrant at best. At best, it's a second language, probably a third language. And so it's really common to be concerned and kind of worried about these pieces and wondering what you bring to that conversation. But what I think that caregivers, adults bring is a lifetime or many years of experience socially. You've had that experience, even if you haven't been online, having that experience. Even if it didn't happen on your Twitter feed, you've had that experience where a friend you trusted with some information shared that information. You've had that experience where you've been pulled into kind of a gossip circle and followed along and wished you hadn't. You know what that feeling is in the pit of your stomach. You know how to manage it. You've managed these difficult social situations, and you have that level of wisdom to bring to this conversation. And so I always feel like let young people tell you how it all works. How to post something. They'll teach you. They'll be glad to teach you, right? That technology side is maybe a little more uncomfortable for us, but the relationship side, which really is what it comes down to, right? So no matter what platform, I can be giving this talk 10 years from now, and it won't matter. It'll be a platform that doesn't even exist yet, but it will come down to making those same relationship decisions and having those same dilemmas about how you're going to not only behave online, but also support one another and support one another in person, support one another in relationships. So tips for youth, of course, is when I'm talking to youth, we talk about avoiding derogatory language, discouraging put-downs. Those two make sense. But then this idea of focusing on internal versus external qualities is one that is a little more challenging. And if we really think about it, and it doesn't mean all the time, sometimes someone posts a baby picture and you just want to say, oh, how cute, right? And that's fine. But asking yourself, can you also say, what a wonderful experience, I'm so happy for you. So what does that start to look like when we start to think about those experiences or internal qualities rather than just what we're seeing on the surface? And then what we think about when we think about relationships, understanding each other, having that empathy. And empathy meaning, of course, what does it mean? What might it mean for me to be in your shoes, right? That's a skill that takes time, and we can sometimes do it better than other times, even as adults. When we're really stressed out, sometimes it's harder as a skill than when we can kind of be calm and open and a safe environment for a friend. So thinking about those qualities and skills. And then the dehumanization. So this is something that I think is a really important factor. If we dehumanize something, if we forget that there's a person behind the post, or that there are feelings, if we share that joke, there are feelings that make it hurt. If we kind of forget that all that is real, that's when these things tend to happen, right? And so just remembering that there is a person behind that post, there is a person behind that profile picture, there is a person even behind the person that's sitting across from you smiling that may not be showing you everything that's going on in their life or in their world right now. So caregiver considerations, so thinking about engagement, thinking about those power differentials. So intent to harm and repetition. When we think about that for ourselves, our own lives, our children's lives, maybe we didn't intend it, but maybe it was harmful. Or maybe there is a power differential we're not acknowledging, right? So there are power differentials in our life all the time. I have supervisees, there's a power differential. I need to be conscious of that when I'm talking to a trainee, right? I need to be conscious of the fact that we aren't going to joke on the same level. It's just not that way. So something to think about. And then expanding the meaning of what safety means. Where is a safe place? What is that safe space in your home? Where can your child, niece, granddaughter talk openly about those feelings? And here's a real challenging one. I think when we think about this, we think about talking to our children maybe when they are being hurt. But what about when your child is doing the hurting? Are you ready to listen to them then? Because that's really important. It's really important that the community holds that child up then too. Because as part of the community and as part of building that climate, that's going to be an important place to know that you can learn from that experience and seek wisdom from the adults in your world. And so think about those protective environments. And by protective, I don't mean that we're protecting our children against all the bumps in the road. Those are really important. There's a great book called Blessings of a Skinned Knee. I really love that book, and it's about that. It's about bouncing back from adversity. But protective in the sense that we are offering that safe climate, those safe connections. And so here are my references. And I think we have time for a couple of questions or comments. And kind of as we raise the lights up, I do want to say that we're gathered here today. I got a little nervous when I heard there were 90 people here today. But what is exciting about that is everyone sitting in these chairs cares about this topic, cares about creating that climate. And so to me, this could be the beginning of those conversations that you begin to have, those positive circles that you begin to create where you maybe sit down together over coffee and talk about an article that talks about this topic and how can you make that climate change in your world, in your school community or in your neighborhood community. And so I hope you feel empowered today to take that home with you, because I really believe you fought the traffic, you came to the medical center because you care about this topic, right? Anyhow, I'll open it up. Comments, thoughts? Yeah. I don't think it's not just us, and that first study from 1998 was the World Health Organization, right? So no, it's definitely not just us, and there are studies that come out of everywhere. But I think, we certainly have our own unique cultures, right, to think about, and we are online a lot. I mean, there's a lot of sort of pieces to this that maybe are uniquely American, but I feel like this is a phenomenon that is happening everywhere. And Stuart Twemlow, who is the psychologist who consults for Positive Works, he is from Australia, and that's something they have programs there, right? So I would say no, but it is and then if it's a universal problem, then that really does speak to it being a process we have to address, right? Yeah. Well, again, I don't know that I have direct advice, but when I really think about what those risk factors were that we looked at with anonymity or social cues, right? So when we lose those social cues, when we lose when we have anonymity or when we're not getting that sort of nonverbal cueing, then what we do know is that does increase risk, right? So what you're describing is sort of responding with that nonverbal communication and sort of looking someone in the eye, and then thinking about humanizing a situation. All those things seem to be, I think, good advice. But again, every situation is different, and then thinking about that situation not in a silo, right? So what's going on in the community? Where is maybe a safe space? Are there safe adults to talk to? Those kinds of pieces as well. Like you're going to get a mic?
Well, many organizations and schools may want these types of programs. They can also find themselves feeling a bit vulnerable to invite that sort of thing in. I'm just wondering what might be some metrics that might appeal to leadership of an organization or a school board or such, because here's HISD allowing, and that would hopefully be something that might spread to other schools and communities, and I'm sure that it would have to be data driven, et cetera, in order to get funding to be able to sustain such.
Yeah, so that program, and again, I do not work for them, although I really do enjoy and like Sarah and Trish and their organization, what they did. But that organization, what it does uniquely, I think, is it builds on other organizations that are already there. So things like No Place for Hate, things that are already in the school climate. So they're not trying to change what's already there. So whatever HISD school policy is, whatever is sort of the data-driven metric that they're using, this would be sort of in congruence with that, in conjunction with that. So that's kind of how that works. And I've been there, so I'll speak personally. Having been a school psychologist, what you can't say is what's happening behind the scenes, right? You know a lot about what's happening behind the scenes, but every person may have one version of the story. And it's hard sometimes to have that wider perspective. And what I think I always wished I could say is if we like the focus being on that positive school climate, on every kid in that school knowing that they're in a community that cares about them, that even in their hardest moment, that they're going to be in a community that is going to do their best as imperfect beings coming together to build a safety net for children, right? So I wished that, I think looking back, hindsight, that's what I would say. That's what I would say. It really matters that, because gossip's going to happen in 7th grade. That's going to happen. Those things are going to happen, and it doesn't mean not to continue to talk to kids. One of the things with gossip I always used to talk to kids about was asking yourself the litmus test of, is it true, is it kind, is it necessary? If it doesn't pass that test, then maybe don't pass it on, right? But we as adults could continue to learn that lesson, right? So being not a perfect community, but a community that's willing to look at those pieces and look at ourselves and be able to be vulnerable in front of each other and keep getting better. Yeah? Anyway, maybe, are we good?
Do with this? Is it more girls and boys, and do boys ever bully girls and vice versa?
I don't know. I mean, there is some research that certain groups are a little more at risk. For example, I didn't share this slide, but obesity puts a child at risk, and I want to say for boys more than girls, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% on that. And the way I think we used to traditionally think that boys were more physical and girls were more verbal, but I think we're learning that boys can be just as verbal and girls can be physical, right? So it doesn't necessarily hold true. Groups that are at greater risk, certainly LGBT teens are at higher risk for bullying, and then even perceived, even using those insults for someone who's like a boy who's perceived as not masculine enough or some things like that. So we know that as a risk, right? Higher risk. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah. And I'm going to look up that stat and get back to you on that because I'm curious.
Well,
yeah.
On the same note, is there a personality that tends to be more victim or more?
I haven't read the research on that. Again, I can certainly look at that. What we do know is that when a child has been bullied and is doing that bullying behavior, they are more at risk as the sort of bullied bully, right? And you've got to think a little more broadly. That could even mean at home. Maybe the person who's hurting them, bullying them, is a dad or a family member, okay? And so then that comes out at school, and that's that sort of like doubly hurt. It hurt. What we do know in the research is the kid who's doing the bullying is also being hurt in the process. It hurts you to be doing that behavior. So that has long-term effects as well for correlating with depression and things like that, right? So what we do know is that piece, that it hurts everybody. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Acosta. Thank y'all. And thank you all very much for coming today. Our next Ambassadors on Call will be back here on October 26th. Dr. Chris Greeley is going to talk to us about medical marijuana. Who's using it? What's it used for? Does it work? So hopefully you'll all be able to join us. I know we have a lot of special guests today, especially from the league, so thank you all for coming. There are ambassadors packets if anybody would like to join. And for our members, our upcoming holiday party has been set. It's going to be Wednesday, December 7th at the beautiful home of Sarah and Greg Snyder, who actually for the league members is their incoming president, ironically. And we're also expanding ambassadors into the Woodlands. And so we'll be having a celebratory party there as well to kick off the Ambassadors of the Woodlands program on December 1st. So for those of us who live in North Houston, hopefully you'll be able to join us for that. So thank you all very, very much for coming. And Dr. Acosta may have 2 or 3 minutes to stay. I'm not sure if she does or not, but if anybody has any questions, otherwise, thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.